Yeah, well, welcome everyone. Kia ora koutou. No mai haere mai. It's a real pleasure to have so many of you here. I know often in Liviana's we go around and introduce everyone, but maybe if people just want to put in the chat where they're joining from, and that might be in the interests of time a bit expedient. But my name's Nikolai. Galina and I are delighted to host this session. I'll just run quickly through a little bit of the format, and then some introductions, and then we can get going. So the sort of first half is going to be the presenters talking, and then the second half is going to be quite an open discussion. So we've got 6 wonderful presentations, which will be 5 minutes each. Strictish on the 5 minutes so that we can get through everything. Then Galina's got some tough questions for the panel. After that, we can take a short break, and then we can open up for a full discussion in the second half. We do just have to finish 5 minutes early because there's a back-to-back session after us. But yeah, I mean, it's very exciting to have so many people here. I think this is a topic that certainly, I don't know, is blossoming at the moment for me. I think the sensory, and to say how we sort of came about to this topic. And I actually only met Galina earlier this year at an anthropology conference where she was talking about sensory relational approaches, but came across this fantastic paper of hers and Will, who's also here, sort of ways of unknowing landscapes. And I mean, for me, agriculture is very much at sort of a crossroads. You've got the project of growth and techno-optimism and sort of endless promissory futures that rely on sort of calculability and measuring, and that's taking us one way. And then at the same time, we have a real push for degrowth and agroecology and regenerative relations. And the sensory is very much involved in how we come to know and what that implies. I don't know if you want to say something, Galina. Feels very weird to talk about someone else's paper.
I feel very pleased to just listening to you. Thank you for bringing this up, and welcome from my part as well. Tervetuloa, everyone. Yeah, so if just briefly jumping in to say a few words about this, as Nikolai said, we met in the summer and started talking about many things that we sort of sensed that we align, or at least have a common interest to. And this article was actually, it was a painful process, but I'm really happy we went through the painful process of getting it eventually published. But what I want to raise for the sake of the panel today, or for us meeting today, is that one of the points that we wanted to raise is when we try to engage and be interested in other than human beings, and get out there in the world and try to curiously sort of find ourselves amongst other beings, we cannot ignore the relations that underlie the ways we reach out to those other beings. And this article was one of those where we kind of realized that we cannot also extract one part out of the whole landscape, basically. So of course we can, for analytical purposes, to look at ants or to look at worms or to look at soil, but in the end they're part of the whole landscape. And this piece was kind of to bringing landscapes alive and to reclaiming the concept of more than human landscapes. So that's all I want to say about it now.
Okay, brilliant. I'll just say briefly, my work has mostly been focused on wine. And the idea of the sensory has come across in 2 quite distinct ways for me. The first is actually, we get these anthropologists and geographers and sociologists raving about the sensory turn, and suddenly we can know things by smelling and listening and hearing. But I mean, in many ways, this is quite banal. And there's parts of the world where this is just what you do and how you've done it for thousands of years. I think, winemaking is one example of fermentation, but it's always relied on sort of sensory ethnography, and even as a student, that's sort of how you get taught to know. But at the same time, at least at my university, all the research on wine is focused just on smell. and smell in isolation. So it's always been about, well, how does New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc smell like tropical pineapple and passion fruit, and how can you make that more? Which is a really weird way to study a product that you drink, I think. And the more and more I've sort of, through ethnography, and I've got a photo there on the left is a bit of yeast that I left out in the sun for about 5 minutes too long. And you can tell that because it's sort of grown far beyond the bucket and made a bit of a mess. And it's very much a sort of, it's a synesthetic process. There's no single sense, and there's no yeah, it's almost atmospheric, I think. Often you know what to do, not necessarily because you smell it or you taste it, but because of a sort of a sense rather than a smell. So that's all I wanted to say, and then I think Galina's gonna have a quick go, and then we'll get to our 6/7 wonderful presenters.
Yes, so currently I just launched a new project in September, and it's called Sense of Biodiversity, Invisible Knowing in Disappearing Farming Landscapes. And the whole idea of this project is to try to somehow reimagine biodiversity through senses and through sensory relations and sensory approaches. There's going to be a small team, and Will, who is also present today, has just started as a postdoc in this project, and we're both going to be doing sensory ethnography starting next year. And there's also going to be an ecologist. So this is actually an interdisciplinary project where we but we are planning to synthesize ecological biodiversity assessments with sensory ethnographic observations of biodiversity, and maybe something new can emerge. These are just some of the questions that we're asking in this project. And I'm going to put in the chat a link where you can read more if you're interested, and happy to talk more about it, but I'm not going to take any more space now. I'm really looking forward for all the presenters and the discussions today. Thank you.
Kia ora. So please do save questions in that for the end. Feel free to put things in the chat in the meantime. And yeah, it's my great pleasure to welcome, is it Carlotta, Annalisa? I don't know who's in, a bit of both, I'd imagine, but go for it.
Okay, shall I go? So I'm Annalisa, located in Italy. I'll share and I'm presenting my work with Carlotta. We're working on pastoralism. And I'm going to try to share this. Sorry, guys, it's PowerPoint. Share. Okay, so today we consider how visual technologies can help us sense and evoke the multi-species composition and multisensory registers of diverse agri-food economies. We focus on, sorry, this is the wrong. We focus on a form of pastoralism called transhumance, in which humans and animals, goats, sheep, and cattle, move across the landscape in search of grass and water, and produce milk or cheese and meat, which is then exchanged in both mainstream and alternative food markets. Primarily investigated in majority worlds, transhumance is still resilient in the minority world, including Italy, although it is framed as marginal. And such resilience stems from the fact that what humans and animals earn in this form of life is far more than profit. For many farmers, it is about the affective bond with animals that this way of living engenders, which they often call la malattia, literally the illness, which for the sake of briefness we translate into passion. In our research with a herd of goats, we have used different video technologies such as GoPros and body cams to document the work of both humans and animals in this pastoral economy. You should have watched 2 brief videos of this multi-species work, which we have selected to try to show how through movements, sounds, and rhythms, videos, unlike photos, allow us to sense and evoke what we call multi-species atmospheres, the embodied yet collective forces that permeate and spread across human and animals' bodies in this production system. The first video shows humans and animals at work in the milking parlor. In the video, you only see a very brief fraction of this long and tedious work in which humans and animals repeat the same tasks and movements over and over again for 2-3 hours every day, twice a day. This repetitive performance, coupled with the noise of the milking machine in the background, evokes the routines and rhythms of the factory. And after watching videos, of this work, a particular atmospheres of stress and drudgery began to emerge. In the second video, we placed a body cam on the collar of one of the goats just before the herd headed out to the pastures to carry out what we could call grazing work. You only see the floor and a very blurry image of goat's legs and feet, but you can hear the excitement of the dogs barking and the noise of the bells increasing, and you can see the image jumping erratically in response to the goat's fast movements. The video evokes the atmosphere of anticipation and excitement for the work that is about to take place. We have also recorded other videos that evoke other kinds of atmospheres at work in transhumans, like joy, tranquility, insecurity, and boredom. So to conclude, we believe that the focus on multi-species atmospheres that video methods enable can offer a way to focus empirically on diverse socioeconomic practices from a less anthropocentric perspective, for example, capturing animals at work. And finally, and this is our concluding remark for today, video techniques together with the notion of atmospheres helped us to capture those practices that cut across a diverse socioeconomic worlds. In our specific case, more Fordist practices and rhythms operate alongside work that is less prescribed, more gratifying and exciting for both humans and animals. So the changing atmospheres that different work activities produce draw attention to the in-between spaces and perhaps temporalities of more than capitalist economies, where more profit-oriented activities that alienate both humans and animal workers exist alongside and intersect with work that generates other non-monetary rewards. For example, grazing strengthens shepherds' relationship with animals and the environment, and vice versa. Transhumans also provide animals with a good life and death, and it fosters biodiversity and other mountain commons. And many thanks for your attention.
Kia ora, thank you so much, and perfectly to time.
Good.
I'll now invite Erina, I believe. Hopefully your connection is operative.
Okay, let me see how we go. Where does it work? Just to situate myself, I'm in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm an independent researcher, a geographer, and I like focusing on narratives and relationality and making visible the assembled and storied nature of environment, economy, and culture, and focusing on like reimagining and reassembling the economy, environment. So I've just got a couple of examples of the sorts of work I've been doing, which is quite different from the other things that have been mentioned so far. So I have, not exactly sure how to describe it, but I've been drawing stuff, I guess is the right way to put it. So various terminology around this: rich pictures, visual summaries, diagramming, and they're useful for a whole range of things. And for myself, I've been using it for kind of clarifying and thinking through really complex ideas, also for analysis amongst research teams, and for helping build theory and so on. And so I've got a few research spaces that I'm doing this in. One of the projects that I'm mostly drawing from for these examples is a project on, it's called Moving the Middle, Empowering Land Managers to Act in Complex Rural Landscapes. And so the idea is to help farmers move in more positive environmental directions. And I'm on the team that is looking at not dominant narratives and how to reframe those. So one example, to really briefly talk about things, is this little sketch that we've done, which came out of a whole bunch of analysis we did on narratives and the dominant things that are happening around farming in New Zealand. And what we were really looking at when we were describing that was, how do you then intervene? And so we're coming up with these ideas around points of intersection, places to kind of get in those tension bundles and knots. And so I drew those, and through doing that, we were able to talk about intangible things much more clearly as a team, emotional things, and this has been a really amazing resource for our team that we've come back to over and over again and kept focusing on. Oh, what are we trying to do in our research? Oh, that's right, this is what we're trying to do. Another kind of thing that I've been playing with in my work, and these are both very much in progress. Okay, and you won't be able to read them, but the point is they're kind of conversations that are being imagined. And the idea of trying to unpack worldviews and different plausible conversations that people can be having between, like, maybe a persona or a different point of view, and kind of like build provocations or make a jump and sort of do things from someone's point of view and say, well, if this was the future that we might get if people were thinking in this dominant way, well, what kind of conversations might happen in those contexts? So kind of to understand and disrupt and envision alternative futures. So on one here, I've got people arguing about feeding the world and why that might be important, and then the other one from a different piece of work about the different worldviews from Te Ao Māori worldview and Pākehā. And my third example that I've just got here is about bringing non-human aspects into things. So the sketch of the sheep there is just very early on in our project. We were like, okay, what are we trying to do? And so I just scribbling this off kind of just helped reorientate us, so that it wasn't all about the farmers, but is in fact about the other lives that are happening in things. Other sketches I've kind of done. Someone was mentioning about the ways that things are happening across the land, landscapes coming alive and not being able to be kind of taken out. So we've been talking with farmers about how you can't see the land for the farm, and that the natural world doesn't really respect the boundaries that we always come up with, but ways of kind of not just communicating, because that really kind of reduces this, but as boundary objects and ways to talk through things. And the one on the right there is some brainstorming sketch that I did for myself about, I wrote a story, I'm not sure if this is going to go anywhere, but about a farmer turning into a worm and having a little journey underground and coming across the water and noises and realizing different connections and things. So with the idea of kind of being playful about things, not taking things too seriously, I guess, because sometimes these are really difficult conversations, and wanting people to just have a go at thinking through things. We've been doing some games, serious games, which these sorts of diagramming things, and our team has been underpinning. I do have some other examples, but I don't know how I'm going on time, so it's probably enough for now. Yeah, those are the sorts of things I've been doing. I lost track of time, so apologies.
That's good. No, kia ora, Erna. Thank you so much.
Cool.
I think next up is Rai, who I also had the fortune of meeting in Helsinki at an anthropology conference.
Yeah, brilliant. Can you see the slides there? Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, it was great to, I'm in a group chat with Nikolai and kind of shared the opportunity. So great to be able to develop the idea. It's similar to what I presented. So apologies, Nikolai and Galina, but it's developed a bit. My name is Rai. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Greenwich, and I partner with Rothamsted Research in the UK. So currently coming from a cafe in the middle of fieldwork in Devon. I'm also a co-founder of a kind of an arts research collective called Resonating Fields, which I'll talk about a little bit. So my journey into the sensory work, I've been working on kind of more than human soil relations in agricultural contexts in Devon, really inspired by the work of Anna Shevashinska, thinking about a kind of relational materiality around soil and soil research, but also recognizing non-human entities in that kind of work. But I was inspired. I did a review with some colleagues on methods for more than human research, and was inspired by some of the sensory work. And at the same time, came across a group of researchers, ecologists and conservationists that have been developing a technology, soil bioacoustics, where you effectively put microphones into the ground and you pick up sound recordings. So here is from a paper that I've linked at the end, kind of a visualization of the different soundscapes of different soils. But what I was finding when I was speaking to these researchers is a lot of them weren't actually doing that much listening. They were kind of using algorithms to analyze and come up with kind of assessments and try to think about things like soil health scores, and it's linked in the kind of move towards measuring and monitoring and even financializing, biodiversity credits. I was thinking, what would bringing the actual practice of listening using this technology do? I started on my own. I've done some kind of work with myself. I've also done some participatory work with farmers. But I often found when I was doing it one-on-one with farmers, there was awkwardness, there was some discomfort. It's also sometimes live listening isn't incredibly lively. I think there's something that comes out of doing it, or I found something that comes out of doing it myself after many repetitions and listening to different soils, but sometimes just sitting and listening and asking a farmer to listen with me for a bit. They kind of want to know more. They move towards knowing how it can inform their practice very, very quickly. I presented some of this at the conference that Nikolai mentioned and got some great feedback, but also then had two opportunities this summer around doing participatory listening. And I'm basically going to give two examples. So at Groundswell, which is a large regenerative agriculture conference, I pitched a panel where it was going to be very kind of bringing lots of researchers in conversation, but the organizers said soil bioacoustics a bit niche. So they offered us an installation instead, and they helped us kind of design this bell tent where we had some speakers inside, and we played a selection of soil sounds. But it was very last minute, off the cuff. I'd never done this before. We got some great feedback. There was a mix of farmers and non-farmers. It was a kind of farming conference. But we met with basically someone that came to the workshop, liked it, and wanted to fold it into her own work that she does with fashion designers, actually. So we partnered with the group. It's called British Pasture Leather. They are an interesting group where they're trying to create more transparency in the leather supply chain. But they do field days where they bring fashion designers, mostly from London, but from other places as well, that work with leather onto a farm and do it like a kind of a farm tour. But they were wanting to bring more sensory work into that. So after they went out into the fields for 2 hours and learned all about the interactions of mob grazing and cowpats and dung beetles and how they aerate the soil, they came inside to this area that we kind of built out, and the organizers gave us some funding to expand our listening. So we have more speakers. We had a subwoofer for the first time. and we did some kind of group listening. So we brought everyone together. We worked with the facilitator that did an embodied kind of body scan, breath work. The listening session was about 45 minutes. We did this with 2 different groups. We got feedback from the first group that listening for 45 minutes was actually uncomfortable. So in the second session, we brought in clay for something to do with their hands. We were at first worried that it would take away from just the listening experience, but we actually found it was really, really beneficial. And it also became a mode of speaking about what they were experiencing in their minds. Some people created a web that they described themselves moving through. Some physically made a beetle. Others just had something to do with their hands. But the feedback was really, really interesting. My connection to the kind of post-capitalist futures is maybe a bit tenuous, but I think some initial findings or initial reflections around these experiences was that the really intellectual discussion around the importance of, or the impact that different forms of agricultural systems have on the soil, the life in the soil, were really solidified by bringing in this particular sensory experience. And I think my work with soil and the sensory stuff is people that are working with the soil on a very regular basis have lots of different sensory contact points, but people that are slightly more detached, I think, really struggle to kind of create a mental image of what's happening beneath the soil, what they can't actually see. We're quite visually dominant, so soil is difficult to know, I think, and the sensory, mediated by this particular technology, I think is compelling. But I found that the collective work, the group work, has been much more impactful in generating interesting discussions around, how this is connected to different forms of agriculture, how that impacts the soil, and how that's connected to different forms of food production and kind of the nutritional quality of food and all that. But the individual listening with farmers, I found it moves very quickly to wanting to know how it can inform their practice. So I realize I'm probably coming up on time, but I've got just some thank yous from the group. I'll drop a link, but I have a SoundCloud where you can actually listen to some of the soil sounds. And here's that reference. And then if you want a really kind of curated 45-minute soil meditation recording, the file's quite big, but you can reach out to me and we can figure out a way to share it. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Yeah, definitely odd sounding soils, but very, very cool. Kerry, I believe you're next. Welcome.
Thank you. Really interesting from everyone. Really interesting, Ryan. I'm just thinking also about the farmers that I've worked with, how they were really keen on how the research could, inform practice. In the back of my mind, I thought, I don't know if it can inform your practice. And that's something I'm still grappling with. So I feel like I kind of resonate with what you're saying there. Let me share this one little slide that I have. All right, and I'm also obviously I better make it full. All right, so I'm Kerry. Thanks for having me here and for giving me a chance to talk about some of my research on vegetable farming and care and touching. And I specifically wanted to address in this quick 5 minutes this question here about how can embodied sensory practices of agri-food production work to overcome dualist onto-epistemologies. This is actually a question that I've become increasingly interested in, and not just from the agri-food perspective, but just from everyday practices to even people that are living in urban settings. And so hopefully that's something I can continue on with in future. So I'm going to draw on the work that I did for my PhD to do this. And the dualisms I'm talking about are familiar to you all: mind, body, human, non-human, optic, and haptic. Maybe that's less commonly talked about. And I know that we all know that they're really deeply rooted in Western philosophy, education, and religion. And they shape knowledge, ethics, care, and they privilege cognition over embodiment, humans over non-human earthkin, and vision over touch. So my PhD explored more than human care in commercial vegetable farming And as part of that, I looked at how touch cultivates awareness of and concern for our non-human earthkin, such as soil communities, insects, plants, machines, and tools. I'm just going to also say earthkin from now on. It's a term that I use instead of more than human or non-human or earth others that I've borrowed from someone else. So touch and care are deeply entangled. Caring requires touching, whether that's in the household, it's in hospitals, nursing homes, or it's on farms. And different kinds of touch can make different kinds of care possible. And so I really draw heavily in my work on the work of Karen Bride and Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. And following them, I think of touch as an interaction. So it's something that transforms both the toucher and that which is touched. I also see touch as something part of much larger, messier entanglements that it can include things like beliefs or technologies and values, for instance. So my kind of sensory methods was through participant and non-participant observation. And I did this on 2 commercial vegetable farms in Victoria, in Australia. And these farms, they differed widely in practices and priorities, and the human farmers even seemed to embody different values and beliefs as well. But both the farms offered really rich sites for feeling and observing how humans and earth can meet through touch. And the photo you can see here, or the 2 photos, I should say, shows those 2 sites. And I hope by looking at them, you can get a bit of a feeling, even though you're only doing it through seeing, but you can still get a bit of a feeling for what those 2 sites might be like. I don't have heaps of time to go through the detailed findings, but the broad brush kind of finding was that both farms were awash with touching and caring interactions. And they were made by different farming practices, and made different farming habitats and also different farming subjects as well. Touch was central across both farms to more than human caring. It was central to knowing how to care, to generating concern for non-human earthkin, and also in carrying out the tasks that helped vegetables to grow, soils to be fertile, and humans to earn a living, amongst many, many other things. That's just some examples. Yet, what was interesting to me is these touching and caring interactions did not necessarily dissolve human farmers' dualistic thinking and being. So many of them saw themselves as being discrete beings who were interacting with and also caring for nature and for landscapes, rather than, intimately entangled with those landscapes. So I guess touch alone doesn't overcome dualist onto-epistemologies. And my insight from this research is it's because touch is overflowing with meaning and matter that shape the quality and significance of touch and the attachments that it facilitates among earthkin and humans. Touching is always modulated by beliefs, values, education, technologies, and of course, broader socio-economic conditions. So these forces interact with the sensuous experience of touch to shape what kind of attachments and what kinds of care are possible. So while touch does add sensuous information experience to human engagement with earthkin, and I definitely witnessed on many occasions that it shapes ethical negotiation of how we live with non-human earthkin in the context of farming. I think it's really important that we pay attention to the conditions through which touch occurs in helping us to understand how touch can contribute to breaking down dualist onto-epistemologies. And so I'm going to leave it there. I have a few kind of ideas about what kind of conditions we might pay attention to, but I'm pretty close to time, and maybe we can talk about that a bit more in the discussion.
Kia ora. Thanks so much, Kerry. Andrea, all yours.
Yes, thank you. I'll also share one slide. Can you see this? I have to go to, how do I share it in big? Sorry for that. Sorry, give me a second. Do you see it in big now?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm talking today about sensory encounter with alternative agriculture. So I'm in my 5th year of a PhD in geography at the University of Lausanne. And I'm doing in my PhD, I'm researching alternative agriculture in Switzerland and Morocco. And I'm trying to understand what keeps farmers at the margin of state planning and agro-industry. So I'm studying through ethnographic research methods, but also others, like from a geopolitical level to the level of intimacy, what keeps farmer doing what they are doing. So what I want to present today is actually an example of 6 interludes I have in my thesis, in my written thesis, which I call Sensory Encounters with Alternative Agricultures, which are written in a style of ethnographic fiction. What I was struggling a bit in my research before was that I was kind of trained to see rather like negative pressures and forces which dismiss such things as sensory pleasure and sensory encounters as like secondary to the real material struggles of capitalism and so on. But then I came to understand working with farmers that actually those sensory moments are really crucial to understand what they are doing and why they keep doing it. So I thought I'd just read you one little extract, and I let you choose among the pictures you see here to which one you want to have a little text read out by me. So maybe you can just speak up, and the first person speaking up telling me which picture, and then I will read something.
Goat.
The goat, okay. So I will stop sharing and I'll just read you out about the goat. So the text is called Data for the Senses, Feeding the Kids. Let me invite you to a little meditation. Imagine you call a farmer, you ask for an interview, silence on the other end. Then February is a busy time of the year. You explain your research interest and that you're happy to help on the farm, even if you're not really qualified. You mention that you love goats. Blah, blah, blah. Now I cut for you. Then, the next morning, 8:30, you enter the stable. The warm air smells of hay and goats. It envelopes you instantly. A bleating fills the space, and you see a bustle of kids separated into different wooden pens. Lawrence has 2 bottles of warm cow's milk under her arm. She climbs over the first barrier and hands you 1 bottle. She shows you how to feed them. You kneel down. You pick one up. You test with your finger if it can suckle. You feel the little flat teeth on the lower front on the firm, smooth gum on top instead of upper teeth. Then the sandpapery texture of the tongue, warm and a little rough, like a cat's, but gentler, enough to tickle, not scratch. You try to bring the bottle into the right position to feed the kid. You feel its damp muzzle press against your hand. It's not easy. The kid moves around, eager to drink, but still learning how. You gently press your fingers against its cheek so it opens its mouth and hold it against your lap so it can't back away. Ah, it works. The kid starts drinking. You hear the rhythmic smacking, see the milk level in the bottle drop, and its little tail start to wag. Surrounded by the kids, between you, on you, and in your arms, Lawrence explains her dilemma. I keep the kids with the mothers most of the time. I can't separate them, maybe because I'm a mother too. So I just separate them for a while milking the mothers and make up for it by giving the baby some cow's milk from a neighboring farmer. I want to do the right thing, ecologically and economically, but I'm not sure if I'm managing either. Lawrence leaves you alone for a moment. You look around to see if you've forgotten one, if everyone has been fed. You touch their fluffy, warm bellies. When they feel round and firm, you know you've had enough. You spot another one sleeping in a corner. You gently lift it onto your knees, stroke its hard little head and soft body, and offer it the bottle. The others, already fed and full of energy, explore your clothes, nibble at your sleeves, try to climb onto your knees, or step on your back with their tiny hoofs. You can't help but laugh, kneeling there in the midst of this jumping, fluffy, wagging, warm bundle. Lawrence is back and lets the kids and mothers come together again. Some stop in front of her to be cuddled, and you understand what she means when she said, the goats, the contact, we receive so much love from them, seeing them, touching them, listening to them. Voila. So that was a little sharing of such text. And I'm done.
Wow, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And now to Bethany.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring us back down to the urban, or away from the broader agriculture scales that we've been looking at, which have been really fantastic. And Yuma, I'm coming from Ngunnawal Ngambri country in Canberra, the capital of Australia, and I'm an environmental humanities scholar at the University of Canberra. So I am going to share a little bit about the work that I've been doing over a while now, and I'm primarily a humanities and social science scholar. And key strands of my work are looking at compost, soil, and food gardening relations in urban areas, looking at how these function within households and how households are connected, or the interfaces between households and the broader community through these particular ways of tracing food relations and waste relations and soily relations. And in this work, this involves mainly surfacing and extending understanding of more than human relations through a sensory approach. Often this is mediated through human experience, which I think is one of our challenges within these particular spaces. So commonly involves, mobile go-along interviews, tracing and mapping household food and scraps managements, and encouraging reflections on and attentiveness to the ways that humans are called into action by the smells, sights, and sounds of the shifting materialities. And this involves audio recordings and photography, and often written and audio-visual diaries as well. Much of this work looks at the interplay between the technical sensing technology that are used in households. So a really simple example is a thermometer used in a compost heap, and the effective force and resulting actions that are taken when people describe and record their own bodily responses to those very material conditions and the climatic conditions, and exploring how and when they're best able to attune to flux when there's change, and respond in particular ways. So that technical and the embodied are kind of played off against each other. But these approaches have lots of limits. And I guess that we have been exploring with a number of colleagues different creative ways of thinking through and capturing some of these entanglements, focusing on these relations. And this is an example from one piece of work done with a colleague, Mitchell Whitelaw, where we'd placed cameras, weatherproof cameras, into compost heaps, taking photos every 30 minutes from 3 to 7 days of different compost heaps, focusing in on this one little square that you can see at the top, and then tracing what happens over time to try and surface some of those really key changes that are occurring because of the multiplicity of action that's happening in these particular places. So I guess we've been playing around with these kind of things in different ways, and exploring how, when people engage and see these images, and these are things which we share with our participants, that we're putting these into their compost heaps, and we've had a number of exhibitions in art galleries, and looking at the ways that this might encourage people to critique the high tempo and high volume and large scale approaches to food waste management in particular, and soil care in urban spaces. So we kind of think of this as a suite of sensory approaches that we're developing. And I like to think of it as a process that involves getting a feel for what we call compost time. And that's because compost is all about diverse temporalities. We're constantly responding to specific contexts, specific changes in, little climates, and microclimates that are happening in the compost heap, and the dietary habits of households that are producing compost. There's always in flux, demanding responsiveness and attentiveness. And this kind of notion of engaging with compost time, we think, as being a way of thinking through being in good relations, like that concept from Max Liboiron, being in good relations with the more than human world, and that any methodology requires us to be in good relations, and sensory methodologies are key to those sorts of things. So this is just a quote from Mitchell here about how he was really happy with these images because we can see these kind of hints of what's happening in the space, but there's also a lot of unknown that we can't know, we don't need to know, but there's action happening. Another project here was a project where we were composting a 1950s cellulose-based film that was actually a film about fermentation and food preservation, and we were exploring what it was like to make a film with your compost heap. So we actually placed pieces of strips of film in 3 different compost scenarios across the Ngunnawal country and Ngambri country where I'm located, and invited the compost to remake this film with us. And then at the exhibition, we screened the original film alongside we were able to re-record this film. It doesn't look like it here. We had to do a bit of washing and caring for the film, and explore what it might be like to make something, to create something with your compost heap that isn't just the compost and the soil conditioning, but a way of visualizing the really generative action that occurs in these spaces. And this final project is in a beautiful called the Kind Regards Collaborative Network that I'm a part of, which is an Indigenous and non-Indigenous group, and we've been working with plants and in particular weeds, and looking at how we can get to know places through the soil conditions that support diverse species of plants that are growing there, but weeds in particular. And we've been creating water-based paints from the pigments of weeds, and actually doing some eco-dyeing with some of the plants to try and understand how we can best enter into these relationality with these diverse materialities, and think about again what it means to be in good relation with the entities that we are living with and that are all around us. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Bethany. I see Nikolai not putting his mic on, so it's probably my turn. So thank you, everyone, for your contribution so far. And I somehow feel that I want to change our initial plans, but I won't. I will stick to them. I'm not going to take the liberty. So I'm going to put in the chat a couple of questions for all of those who presented now, and you can choose whether you wish to answer both or the other one in your own turn. Nicola, do we have some 20 minutes for this, maybe? Yeah, so we have some 20 minutes, so be conscious about time, but you can also, I want you to invite to reflect. You can reflect on what others have presented, you can reflect on your own presentation, and maybe these questions will allow you to do so through answering them as well, or maybe not both of them, but either one of them. The other one is related to methodology, and I know some of you already presented some really intriguing ways in which you inquired into whatever you studied. So if you want to, reflect a bit more on what kind of methods you used and why did you choose these particular methods, and what do you think you achieved, or did you achieve? What worked, what didn't? And the other question relates to the politics of sensory work. And it's really hard, actually. We can continue this discussion after we open the space for everybody to participate. But I just want to invite you also maybe to reflect on the ways that we can actually access the sensory of other than human beings, right? Whether we can and how can we, and whether and how we can be rigorous while doing that, and should we be doing a bit more self-reflection as well. So these are the two questions to open up a space, and you can just put your mic on because you're so few, or raise your hand, whichever works, and I can facilitate. But please go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, Annalisa, please.
I'll just jump in quickly with my big question about ethics. We in Carlotta, we talked a lot about, so as you know, especially because for the body cams, okay? So we put body cams on the body of the animals, right? The thing is that in the social sciences, there are not really guidelines, okay, on how to deal with that. Briefly, we I don't know how to say this. We said, well, our ethical guidelines is about if the goats in this case, but also we were engaging with dogs, for example. If they reject, if we can see that they don't like it, okay, we'll just won't use it. So briefly, that's the point. And Carlotta was in the field. She did all the legwork basically. But still, we are not happy with that. Okay, that's we talked with ethologists, that Carlotta did, to try to figure out how to deal with the dilemma. We don't have an answer, and we are very uncomfortable with our decision. So if somebody has some feedback, some papers, I would be happy to hear it. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Annalisa. Very, very important point. Thank you for sharing.
Hi, maybe I can just jump in. Thanks so much for hosting this session, and maybe just to echo rather than provide any answers to number 2, but I'm just in the middle of teaching the mandatory qualitative methodology course here at the Stockholm Resilience Center. And this is such a big question because we are such an interdisciplinary space, this question of rigor, and especially now in the backlash of or with a lot of misinformation around science, there's a lot of fear, I feel, among our, let's say, more positivist-oriented colleagues that working with fiction and arts-based methods can cause also a risk for how science is perceived in terms of needing to meet the kind of pressing goals of the Anthropocene. So I just want to echo that this is a question that the PhD group here is asking a lot of, and that as an instructor of that course on qualitative, and as someone who actually orients myself much more with post-qualitative methodology, I often feel these real pulls at the moment, both within the academy, but then also in terms of what that means in increasingly polarized spaces. No answers, just thanks for posing that question here.
Thanks for your thoughts. Thank you. Bethany, please, and then Elena.
Thank you. Yeah, I really just wanted to say how great it was to hear everybody's presentations, and these questions are also great, and they are super complex for us to think through what we're doing. So just a few reflections, I think, around that point, around question 2 and around the ethics as well, after Annalisa's comments. I think it's this is really challenging in terms of the Haas science kind of dialogue, and I think that my personal perspective is that we have to work on all fronts at full speed at everything that we can possibly do, and so I think that it is, in terms of rigor, I think that it's about again, I think I would bring it back to this notion of relationality, which I think is so critical to the ethics aspect as well, right? How do we be in good relations with each other, with the disciplines, with the materialities that we're working with, and what are the guides for that in terms of ethical decision making? And I think there's no simple answers, but I think for us in Australia, when we're working with country and on country, obviously we have a lot of Indigenous kind of perspectives that can be very helpful and useful for us to explore these kind of approaches. But I think there is definitely that need for diverse approaches and that we have different ways of validating those, and we have an acceptance for different ways of validating that because of the diverse contributions that those things can make. So I think we're looking for that, you know, diverse approaches to tackle really complex problems. Just a few thoughts.
Thank you, Bethany. Next, Elena, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm probably just echoing a little bit of what Bethany said really around the question of rigor and so on. It can be a little frustrating, right? Because it privileges one version of critique and rigor over others, and you know, the arts and all these other spaces that people are working in have their own rigor, which is equally valid. And so I get frustrated by the very fact that many, particularly science positive sort of based colleagues, don't see the multiplicity of rigor and so on that there is out there. And just to talk briefly about the first question, about methods, I guess that multiplicity is one of the things that I've been using my methods to try and get at, very differently from everyone else. But I guess there's a lot of words in the worlds I work in, and I was finding that words, and particularly paper structures, are very linear, and they make you talk about things in a linear way. And the things that we're talking about don't fit with that very easily. And things are messy and interconnected in really interesting ways. And I was, I guess, born out of frustration, I started drawing things to talk about it with people. And then I've been finding that really successful as a mechanism for provoking conversations, and just within teams and without, because, and also just bringing out the really key, sometimes just those key essential, I don't really like saying essential, but you know, like elements of something that is really important and key, and then bring that out, but then also being able to hook things in ways that acknowledge that multiplicity, the complexity, the non-linear elements of things. So yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for raising critique towards the concepts that we use. I think it's very important to also reflect on what do we mean by rigor and who gets to define it. So definitely, thank you. Rai, please, and then you can, yes.
Yeah, I think it kind of echoes what I was thinking around, like this kind of research.
Sorry,
Yeah.
do you have your mic on? Or
Yes.
someone
Oh, I might be in a station where there's background sound. I'm sorry.
Okay, then no worries. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
please continue. Yeah.
Is it? Hopefully, it goes away in a second. Is it terrible? Should I go on
It's very
pause?
sensory.
Sorry. Sorry. If it's too much, I can type it in the chat. Okay. Yeah, I think I was reflecting similarly that this kind of work sometimes pushes up against the kind of institutional ideas of rigor and knowledge production. I think it's exploring this like really subjective experience in kind of sensory experience of both the researcher and the participants, but then also getting into this kind of fundamentally always like trying to explore non-human senses and non-human sensing. It always is mediated by some human interpretation and human lens, right? It's like I think something we always talk about in these spaces is kind of the way we can't get out of the anthropocentric experience of us as researchers. But I'm really compelled by the implication and my own experience of trying to sense non-humans and trying to think about non-human senses. Like for example, in the listening experience that we did when we brought the subwoofer in, I'd listened to all these recordings but when we got the sub in, it brought in some different frequencies. And in particular, there was a recording that we took from a dung where there were cows nearby. And when we were listening to on the subwoofer, we could hear the footprints of the cows basically. And it created this like deeply, I don't know, it created a sense of space in a way that hadn't before. And it really felt like I was to bring out I think some of the work that came out in some of the sketches around, or I think, Aaron, was that your work on writing around a farmer becoming a worm? Like it really felt like we were kind of experiencing what the worms or the dung beetles might be hearing in this space that is like very, it's not a space that humans often sense, right? It's like this soily world. So there's something coming out there. And then I think also there's ways to bring this kind of work in conversation with more, traditional methods of knowledge production in institutional context. So I ran some workshops right at the start of my PhD before I really like fully took this, ontological turn, or opened the Pandora's box of St. Pierre's work, like we're talking about in the chat. But I did these more traditional workshops right at the start of my PhD, and I'm bringing in some of the sensory work to these workshops that I'm running kind of in the new year. We're trying to bring sensory work in and doing things like multi-species councils or council of beings as a reference for, like, my research group at the University of Greenwich. We're finding that these multi-species councils are really good as reference tools for then more traditional forms of knowledge production. So it's like, there's ways to, I think, bring this work and think about the kind of blurring of the lines between, arts practice and research and knowledge production. I'm totally inspired by the work of artists in trying to explore some of these things. Shanice Arethra is someone I would reference in soil bioacoustics. She's been developing a phonetic response to the soil sounds. So she's been thinking about how can she create sounds with her mouth that are like reminiscent of the sounds that she's listening to, as trying to think about responding. But even just that prompt of like, how do we respond to what we're listening to is informing some of the research questions that I'm asking, which I think then, start to fold into these ideas of rigor, also these ideas of relevance for the participants that we're working with. So yeah, I don't know if that's like a fully coherent answer, but some reflections on the discussion on the problem.
Thank you, Roy. Andrea, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I also first wanted to make a little comment to Kerry's presentation. You said something about like touch, and that it couldn't overcome even dualist conception of the farmers themselves, or the way I understood it. And it reminded me that when I was writing portraits of the farmer, but also this ethnographic fiction, and then I gave it to the farmers to read it. Often it would, people were very happy about it, but there I had a couple of farmers, they were very upset because they had the impression I was describing only anecdotes of their farming life, and they were disappointed that I was not describing all the agronomic techniques and everything, which they had the impression that was the serious work and that's what is important, so on. But actually they didn't talk a lot about it. So everything they always told me were all those little anecdotes, and also the thing which makes them happy in farming, which are not necessarily the agronomic techniques. And they said everything was correct, but just reading it felt so strange for them. They felt as if I was discredibilizing their work through emotional and sensory stuff. So that was an interesting experience. So it just made me think of that dualist conception, which could, what you said. And then what worked, what didn't work. So overall, I just tried, because it was my PhD, so I thought I have 5 years to just explore different methods. And I first tried something like a sensory mapping of farms, of walking with farmers and asking, where do you feel how, and what does this tree mean, and blah, blah, blah. It didn't work at all. I think maybe also because I was not really comfortable with it. And then I often have the impression, as persons, more than research, we feel comfortable with some methods and not than others. And so some work for us and not others. So that in the end didn't work for me. So I just spent a lot of time with the people, living, working with them. And then I could access all those sensory details I was interested in. And then about rigor or not, I think many things have already been said. For me, at least what I heard as feedback from my PhD committee and jury is that they only accept it because I have very theoretical parts next to it, which was also interesting to see that I have to do the double work. It's appreciated, but I have to show in theory heavy that I can do it, and then it's taken seriously. And then just last little comment for this ethnographic fiction writing, I don't know if you're familiar with, but even within that, there are kind of guidelines of how to recognize rigor. So I think in every sensory method, there are some, at least then if we explain very much, and maybe other people have written about how rigor in that method could work. That's my point.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. Carrie, please.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I wanted to say something straight after you because I had a similar experience in that the reason I was looking or interested in touch wasn't just because that was an experience of my own working on the farms as well, but also it was something that was so commonly talked about by human farms as well, being in touch in particular, and that being in touch with those landscapes was central to them being able to farm well. So sure, they knew things through their, well, the courses that some of them might have done in ag science. They certainly knew things through, the agronomists that came and visit. They knew things through the drones that they used to collect, data on soil moisture and insects and everything as well. But they're all well aware that there was a really important, that the embodied experience of farming was really integral to farming well. So that's, I feel like, an interesting similarity to what you're talking about as well. It just kind of made me think about, what do we live for? And this is probably for all of us here. What do humans live for? Like, in part for emotional and sensorial experiences, right? But so often we favor knowledge not about that, but knowledge about making money, maybe, is a key one in farming. I wanted to speak to that second point about rigor. I mean, lots been said, but the first thing that came to mind is about who are you trying to convince, or who are we trying to convince of something? Is it the public? Is it policymakers? Is it someone that's going to fund research? Is it other researchers that may use different methodologies? I think that's a really important thing, and all consideration, and also what do you want to know? And that's a question that comes up in my work all the time now. I work in Children's Public Health Research Institute, so completely different. And I learn a lot right now, but I'm coming up with this, like, it's a world where if something didn't happen in a randomized controlled trial, it never happened, kind of thing. And people always talk about evidence and the strength of evidence. And I guess I always come back with, yeah, but what are you trying to say? What are you trying to know? That kind of evidence is going to tell you one thing. And yeah, I think that's important consideration. And I think it's communication and a persuasion and education issue, right? I think that we've learned, if going back to, as we're all familiar, the mind, body, the human, non-human, blah, 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 all of that stuff's been around for centuries. And it's so hegemonic in our way of knowing, being, and doing. It's, I think, education, communication around those issues. Not so much like the rigor of the methods, but more, I don't know, maybe I'm second guessing that, because I think the methods are rigorous in their own way, right? Depending, it's not the method itself that is unrigorous or rigorous. It's probably the researchers that are doing that are making it rigorous or not rigorous, and that can be across any kind of methodology. So anyway, I think I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to stop there, but thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. And Nikolai, I'm just checking in. I think maybe
Yeah, sure. Like 2 or 3 minutes. Just at least to stand up or move around, I feel. But if
yes,
anyone wants to run and make a cup of tea or
yes,
thing,
great.
yeah,
So we will be
we'll
back.
reconvene in 2 or 3
So we will be
minutes.
back at 11:15 finish time, 15 past whatever hour, wherever in the world you are. So see you soon.
I might just suggest that, if people want to ask a question or say something, they can just put their hand up in the Zoom, and we can go around. I've just been thinking about this idea of who the research is for, and who the sensory is for. Is it actually for us as researchers? Often I find it's more changing the way that farmers think about their work has been sort of how I've used the sensory, maybe more than other researchers, but yeah, it's a bit of a free-for-all now.
Yeah, I think we can invite anyone to, to go back to what you thought about the presentations, to give feedback, to ask questions, also to come back to the questions that were already raised. Yeah, just basically you can raise your hands and we can give you space, or if there's no queue, then you can just open your mic. Yamila.
I can have a little comment.
Okay, and then Yamila, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, actually, maybe it might connect to Yamila. I was going to say, because me and Annalisa are researching a form of pastoralism or livestock farming that is generally represented as a very marginal practice, especially in the global north. Pastoralism is generally seen as an activity that is still done in the south of the world, where you see shepherds still moving with their animals. But with our research, we're trying to actually show that even though transhumance or other form of pastoralism in the north are few and far between, they're still significant and they're still resilient. I mean, in many places, especially in the Alps in Italy or the Apennine range, somehow these transhumance farms, they still going despite the fact that they tend to be marginalized economically and politically. And so who is our research for? The question that Nikolai was asking. In our case, we basically trying to show that this way of farming, or rather this way of raising and farming animals, is actually resilient and is a way of doing, it's a way of raising animals that brings other benefits besides producing profit for the farmers themselves. And this sort of more than monetary aspects of transhumance can be declined, is declined many different ways by the farmers themselves. Some of them have true passion for animals, and they love the fact that this way of farming allows them to live with animals in a particular way, and it allows them to sort of live in mountain environments, despite the fact that these areas are generally economically in decline or abandoned. But having animals allows them to sort of stay there and continue to farm and continue to do this, despite all of the economic and political pressures that they're receiving from trying to get always bigger or changing their way of doing things. For instance, now introducing different digital technologies to help save time and help them become more efficient in their work. I just wanted to say this as a comment on who are we doing this research for.
Thank you. Yamila, is it Yamila or Jamila, or how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, thanks. I say it with a Jamila, but I'm not. I'm variation is also fine. Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to come back to this idea of also how practices might change, or that's been a bit of a conversation as well about, I guess, of course, given that most of us, I think, are researchers of some kind, and how our being in these subject-object relations also changes. Either potentially the practice of the farmer here is what we've been talking about, or us. And one thing, so I'm in a long-term collaborative ethnography with an alpine dairy farmer, and a couple years ago, I was like, but how is my research with you changing what you do? And he was like, nothing. Like, why? I'm the farmer. Like, you don't even know how to kind of shovel shit properly. And so how would our research like change what I do, the practices that I do? But then a couple weeks later, he called me and he said, you know, the research with you hasn't changed what I do, but it's changed how I think about my work. And I just thought that was an interesting distinction and something that we've been therefore exploring more briefly. And it also made me think, or more deeply, and it also made me think more about not a practice as an outcome in terms of also shifting behaviors, maybe from more conventional farming to alternative farming, but seeing the practice itself as a process in relation with, and that as researchers who become entangled in those processes, we can't find those causal relations in terms of how a practice might change, but that's still the way we think. And in turn, it's also changed the way that I think about my role as a researcher. I don't know. That was just a small reflection, I think, that came up, especially in some of what you were saying, Carrie.
Hi, sorry, I'm just gonna Hi, sorry, my name is Manu. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Technology in Sydney in transition design. But I'm also an urban farmer. I have been growing vegetables for the last 10 years. And interestingly, our civic initiative that we set up here where I am in the Blue Mountains ended up embedding itself in a public high school. And so, interestingly, a lot of the sensory work around coming to know one another in terms of onto-epistemologies, the onto-epistemology of a young person in a high school and the onto-epistemology of a grower, of an organic vegetable grower, has been through doing making pigments from plants and making ink out of charcoal, and so very art-based. But something that has recently come up, which I'm keen to introduce as a bit of an elephant in the room here, has been the advent of artificial intelligence, and where so I've noticed, because the work that we do at the local high school here is my action research project for my PhD. And what I've noticed is this thing is starting to happen where when we provide our embodied synchronous sort of relational inputs, or then it has to be, or like it sometimes has to be validated by looking it up and having the robot validate it in a way. So I'm interested in that tension, and whether you have come across this tension at all in this world of post-qualitative research, and whether what's been happening for you in that front.
Thank you, Manu. Very interesting question. Can I follow up on that just by asking, like, where does that validation requirement come from? Where do you feel, who is it yeah.
Sorry, I'll just tell a story, just as an example.
Yes.
Sorry. So in the school we have chickens, and there is also a therapy dog, so an assistance dog, and there was a discussion amongst the young people in our program whether and there are also pigs, and the sow has just had piglets, and there was a discussion amongst the young people in our program whether it was a good idea to bring the therapy dog close to the sow at the moment, because the sow has piglets and she's very, very protective of her piglets. And so playfully it became this question of who would win, the sow or the cattle dog. And we, as farmers, because we're urban farmers, we've worked with animals a lot, and we know sows, we know chickens, we know dogs. So the adults who had that embodied synchronous experience were saying the sow will win. The sow is very, very strong and it's very dangerous. But the young people weren't happy with that embodied knowledge, and at the end it started becoming let's ask AI, who would win, the sow or the dog? And it's only when AI said the sow would win that finally it was okay. Our embodied knowledge was validated, was okay, it was true. That's the example I can provide.
Thank you very much. This is very illuminating. It's also something that reminds me of the numerous conversations that I have with my own kids, and now this makes me think that maybe maybe this is the generation. Maybe this is a generational thing that I haven't encountered in my fieldwork so much, because I work with farmers who are my generation or older usually. But maybe this is something to, yeah, this is a very important and scary point that you're raising, but
I guess, yes, in terms of successional, embodied, sensible agri-futures, you see what I mean? So in terms of how do you do that? How do you translate that to the next generation of farmers, of young farmers?
Yeah, but I think this is a broader topic with not just in this context, but I think it's an overarching, the AI question is an overarching legitimacy or a generational kind of a thing, because we live on a farm as well. We live on a homestead. And yet still, there are moments where the embodied knowledge isn't enough. We need to ask the AI. So yeah, that's yeah. Thanks for raising this up. If anybody else has any thoughts on this, please welcome to join the conversation or follow up any other tales that we have left here for you to follow. I actually also, as you're thinking, I had a few questions for our presenters previously. I wanted to ask Andrea, because you say yourself that you're writing, your style is you call it ethnographic fiction writing. Was I correct? Yeah. And when I heard you, when I listened to you, I was there. It wasn't fiction. So I wanted to ask you, how do you relate to ethnographic fiction? How do you define it, and why do you use this terminology? Or maybe this was an extract that was, or yeah. So please, just a question on that.
Yes. So I came across this term actually in a conference in August at the Geography conference in the UK. I was already writing a little bit that way, but then I found actually that, like mostly in academics, that when we do something, so many people have already written about it and the concept exists for it. And ethnographic fiction is not defined as you're inventing something. So it's made up of interviews, participant observation, like all the data gathered through ethnographic methods. But just in the lineup or in the story you tell it did not happen exactly in these sequences. So for example, the cuddling the goat or feeding the kids, like bribes of the interviews have not happened that day. So I mixed together like information from, I don't know, 20 encounters with Laurence. And I started with our exchange, which happened over several days, and then that day of milking with different experiences. And so that's the fictional part of it. So nothing is invented. It's just molded together into a coherent flow, working with literature techniques to make it interesting.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the reasons I'm asking this is, again, coming back to this legitimacy and validation and rigorousness, because somehow we are in a company now where maybe, we take this, we hear your story and we believe your story, and we feel that there's value in telling these stories from the field, tales from the field, if you will. But at the same time, I've been using the concept of vignette, for instance, to describe exactly the same what you have been doing, which doesn't, it's exactly the same, but it's more credible in a way, which is ridiculous. But like, if you think that you are trying to introduce this method to a positivist, a quant scholar, and you say that I'm writing ethnography fiction, they're like, oh, cool. I'll read a fiction story. But then if you're like introducing it as a vignette, for instance, then it's the same, but it's a different name. And this is just something that made me think again, like how are the words and the concepts that we use and the ways that we kind of introduce our method, how they also might be, they might be given meaning without necessarily being the meaning that we wish it to be, or this was just like an observation of vocabulary.
How do you call it? Your
Vignette.
vignette? Just a vignette. Just
Yeah,
vignette.
vignette. Yeah, and there's that's also one way of sort of describe it. Like, yeah, you just write lots of vignettes. It's a collage of your ethnographic work, basically.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in super briefly as well? I think and I'm struggling with it also. So I call it creative fiction. And for me, it also emerged in bringing back the verbatim transcripts to the farmer. And he was like, why are these so awkward? Can't you just write them with how they actually were? And so I rewrote them, not making anything up, just improving the flow. And he was like, yes, thank you for now capturing what our conversations, like the meaning of our conversations. And then just, I feel very comfortable with this now. I draw on also the work of, Patricia Levy, and I wrote in the chat as well, Jessica Smart-Guillon, who talk about also fiction, but I don't feel in the space that I'm in comfortable using that for these reasons. And now also teaching qualitative methods, I also actually, it's strange. I feel comfortable with it myself, and I can also for certain journals justify that. But in teaching students, I still feel uncomfortable in saying, please go ahead and fictionalize your data. I just want to throw that out there again as like, yeah. So I have fallen onto creative nonfiction, but I also really love and would love to continue talking with you, Andrea, about that method.
Well, may I also then ask, Elena, did you just put your mic on? Okay, well,
Well, super interesting. Yeah, that's all I was going to say.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask also, Anna-Liisa and Carlotta, you were presenting as well, and I was thinking of the concept or the word transhumanism, which is also something that kind of, yeah, I'm like, why have you chosen to use this, and what does it mean to you? And yes,
We didn't know. Maybe it's I don't know why we use the term transhumans. Transhumans is not transhumanism.
yes,
So
sorry.
it sounds like, and I always get, I don't, well, the reason is that not many people use the word, okay? It's something that pertains perhaps to to France, Italy. Other people call it as a, Jamila, sorry, again, Jamila said before, it's alpine, pastures, is that the other word? So it's and it's about farming. It's it means basically it's just a specific traditional word which is used to indicate people, humans and animals. There are different types of this kind of agroeconomical practice. It depends. It's there are these. I forgot the word in English. So there are people who basically have animals down the valley, and they keep the animals during the winter time in the valley, and then in summertime they go up in the pastures. So that's the meaning. It's not transhumanism.
Yes.
Or
And,
yeah.
and the follow-up question was that where does that originate? Where is the origin of the terminology? Yeah, like
the etymological.
Yeah.
The etymological roots, it literally means crossing the soil or crossing the land. Transhumus, humus soil,
really
and crossing through the soil, basically, because this form of animal farming has always involved moving across the landscape. So transhumans literally means moving, and then, you know, it's been used for transhumanism and all of the other, but in the Mediterranean region, North Africa region, I think is still being used.
And do these people...
I think in the Anglophone world is not known very much. My partner is British, and when I say transhumans, it instantly goes to transhumanism. I'm like, no.
Yeah. That's a really good correction that we're, you know, like having this conversation now. And just one more follow-up question. Is this something that pastoralists themselves are using to identify themselves with, or how is it something that you use as for the purpose of the research, or is this actually used?
No, it's used, I mean, it depends. I mean, because there is different modalities of this form of pastoralism, and historically it used to be a very long distance movement between mountains and valleys, and nowadays it tends to be very short distance movements between in the same valley and just between lower altitudes to higher altitudes. But shepherds themselves, farmers themselves, some of them call it transhumans. Other ones think of transhumans as the old style, which entailed very long movements, and so they don't define themselves as such because they don't make such long journeys anymore. But even in terms of the Italian animal statistics of you know, production systems, animal production system in Italy, you still have a modality of farming which is called transhumans, even on those government official websites. It is basically identified as a very particular style of farming animals.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's a UNESCO heritage, intangible heritage list thingy. So, and it's transhumance or transhumance or whatever. And also there are festivals, the festivals of transhumans to celebrate the movement when you go up and when you come down. But there are also horizontal kind of things. Well, it's a long story on the terminology. And I think that anthropologists have very much to say.
Yes, thank you for opening this.
That quite.
There's a hand raised by Will, and then we can take a couple of questions.
Microphone.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm in the same room with Galina, so anyway, I didn't present, obviously, but it was really nice to sit in to listen to these presentations. Just at this point, I've got a couple of thoughts. One was is around this sort of ethnographic fiction or creative nonfiction, which is interesting because it has so many sort of overlaps with what sort of I guess you could even say is like maybe before this break with positivism in writing, it happened first in film, in like ethnographic film, ethnographic documentary, already in the 1950s and 60s by Jean Rouch, who did a lot of this really experimental what's now called ethnofiction. So it's interesting that a lot of this, what we're talking about with writing now, has its already academic roots in ethnographic film. I think there's some really interesting stuff. That's a really important kind of break with positivism as well. And then another thing that I was thinking is that because I guess the workshop title already sort of alludes to this, but also like what Andrea was talking about, and others, the kinds of questions like how are these farmers or these people continuing to do this work, in the face of all these struggles. What's interesting is that that's the exact same question of what at the beginning of the 20th century was called the agrarian question, right? Which was like a Marxian analysis of capitalism and agriculture. Why are these peasant farmers still here when like, the Marxian analysis, the original one, suggests that they should have been taken over by capitalism by now, but they were still existing. So that question it's interesting that, like, it's sort of course, we didn't call it the agrarian question, but the exact same question is still occurring. I mean, over 100 years after the kind of it was originally posed. I think Alexander Shayanov, I don't know if I'm saying that Russian correctly, Galina, but I've said it wrong before, so I have to be careful. Alexander Shayanov is a really important, did really important work with this. But then the question is, I think it's more strongly taken up currently in these kind of agrarian studies. You'll find work in the Journal of Peasant Studies. Jan de van der Ploeg out of University of Wageningen in the Netherlands has also done a lot of work on this. So I think it's interesting to me that there's a lot of actually really great work in parallel that's not really considered part of environmental humanities. It's much more overtly political. Let's say rural sociology. But I think there's so many sort of there's so much more, there's so much good work out there that I think that can be used to sort of also consider the same question, but with these different methodologies. I think there kind of provides I mean, there's a lot of potential, I should say. So I just wanted to point a couple of those things out in my reflections on what I've heard in this really nice panel so far. Yeah. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Will. I think it's really important to acknowledge the history and also the different traditions that have been also dealing with the same questions or similar questions at least. So really, thank you for raising this, and good literature references there as well. I'm gonna ask Nikolai for because he's our time god for this session. So please remind us, how much time do we still have for some final words of wisdom that we can share before we go into the concluding parts of our session?
Yeah, well, I mean, we can go for another sort of 6, 7, 8 minutes. Yeah. It's just an endless amount of threads, I feel, that we've opened up.
Yeah.
Like the ethics conversation in the chat, I think, has been so cool. I always am dumbfounded that I'm the only person, I feel, doing the sort of research I do that has to apply for ethics. I work with all these wine writers and journalists who don't have to do it, and then all the scientists, and they don't have to do it. And somehow I'm in this weird world that because I talk to people, because I'm in one department, I have anyway. But yeah, 6 minutes or so, which is not enough time, but.
There are some questions in the chat as well. There's a question for Irena. If flow allows, well, it does allow now for the next 5 minutes or so. You had a slide about imagining conversations. Would be super interested to hear more how you use those.
Thanks for the question. That's a work in progress. The idea that we've got behind those is to use those to tease out some of the narrative work that we've been doing around farming in New Zealand and the dominant narratives that there are, and to think through why why we keep getting stuck in some of these places, and to think those through, and then to try and put those provocations and the kinds of questions and things we want people to think about, which was part of that touch point work I thought I was mentioning too, around like thinking about different ways of thinking about time, or what success is and so on, and getting those into some different rooms at different levels with councils and policymakers, but also farmers, and at a few different levels. So that's something we're working on. We haven't quite figured it all out yet, but the unpacking of things in a way that can be more easily mobile into different kinds of places and contexts, and then start conversations to do the enactive kind of work that we want to do, is the idea behind it.
Thank you. I also, since we still have a little bit of time, I wanted to raise a question that we cannot deal with, but we should raise it, which is by Rai here, that because I would be curious to hear some reflections about the connection to the post-capitalist economies, which I believe is a really important one as well. So yeah, some of the work touched on dualist onto epistemologies, but how this work can be used to disrupt, unsettle, challenge dominant economies. Sometimes feels tenuous for you and maybe for other people as well. So would anyone have any comments on this from the top of your head immediately, like wanting to reflect? Because what I was thinking when reading this question, which is probably implicit in the questions that were raised for the panelists and for the broader discussion as well, I've been thinking about our research practices quite a lot. We connect our research topics very much with the futures that we either want to escape or we want to go towards to. But to me lately, it has become more clear and more obvious that the ways that we do research must be re-examined as well. And going towards and going parallel with the capitalist economies, I believe that it's very difficult to decouple academia and academic practices from the actual extractive economic practices that we're living in, and we're trying to research how to get out of by researching alternatives or by deconstructing the non-wanted sort of ways of being and structures and so forth. But at the same time, I believe that there is much to do in the ways that we engage in doing research with our research collaborators in the spirit of not always and very rarely we are able to do it in the spirit of slow science in really kind of reflexive ways. So this is one of the concerns that I'm currently sort of thinking with and also as part of this project, this new project as well. So this is my reflection, not a thorough reply, but yeah.
Maybe I just add one last thing that kind of following from what I said before and what also Galina just said. I think the fact that this sort of question, this agrarian question, seems to be still asked, I think is really the reason I brought that up is because I think it's really fascinating that still, despite the fact that we do live in this global system, there are still so many different ways of being in it. And I think studying people, studying farmers and trying to understand what are all of these little in-betweens, that what are the, let's say, non-agronomic things that are going on in the farms. I think that these are really continuously important to understand how they go in practice. So I think there's an sort of intrinsic value in continuing this work just for the sake of doing it. I mean, if it stops, then it stops. You know, as a maybe practice theory might say, if the practice stops, doesn't continue anymore. It's really, I think, valuable intrinsically to continuously doing this work that is looking in between the sort of broad universalizing sort of picture, and I think that these sensory methods are one of the ways, and even to do it rigorously are one of the ways that it can be done. And of course, as much of this is ethnographic, much of the work that people presented is ethnographic. I mean, the special thing about ethnography is that it's a different way of representing knowledge. It's through storytelling rather than through quantification, for example. And this is obviously one of the key debates between the positivists and, well, for the positivists, it's not a debate. It's, you know, they have there's only one way to do science, which we all know is very partial. So continuously adding ethnographic stories to what we have is, I think, ultimately much more powerful. It has become much more powerful than it was, let's say, even 70 years ago now. So I think for me that the intrinsic value of continuing to do the work that we're all here doing is simply, you know, that's what my response would be. Yeah.
Thank you. I think can you
I think if we go to Kerry quickly, and then we'll have to close, I think.
Thanks, Nikolai. Thanks, Glenn and Will, also for those insights. I just wanted to point out, it's not so much about how sensory methods can degrade the hegemony of capitalist economics, but I think it's worthwhile pointing out that any given farm, I would say any given farm, this big claim, is going to have is more than capitalist, essentially. Sure, there's going to be capitalist relations, there'll be some wage labor, private land, whatever, but there's also going to be relations of reciprocity and relations of care as well that are happening. So for me, the classic diverse economies approach, I guess, is you know, inventorying those diverse economic practices, and then hopefully working to advance those practices of reciprocity or care. The next, I guess, that doesn't answer your question though, Rai, about how does sensory practices advance those other than capitalist relations on the farm. But yeah.
I'll just say quickly as well on that, that my interest was in finding farmers that were looking at moving away from pesticides and sort of non-agrochemical treatments of plant disease. And the place that I found that was in biodynamic practitioners who happened to have a sort of a relational ontology and a worldview of connection. And then the way that they achieved that farming was through sensory work. So they needed to be really connected and really present on their farms, whereas a lot of other farmers got a sort of a schedule in the mail of, you know, this is the chemical you spray every week. They could sort of distance themselves off. So it wasn't causal, but there was this really neat alignment of, sort of non-capitalist, sensory, non-chemical, which was very cool. But yeah, sadly, we are getting to time. I don't want to take up from the next group, but two very quick plugs and lots of thank yous to everyone who's come and talked and presented. But if any of you find yourself in Europe next summer and want to do this in person, Brian and myself are organising a panel at Pollen, which is not the same topic, but actually happens to be very similar. And then Galina and I are very keen to progress this into a special issue. So we'll circulate a sort of an expression of interest form I've got a full list of email addresses. So yeah, keep an eye out for that, and presenters and non-presenters and anyone else will be very welcome to submit to that. But yeah, thank you so much. I think good night from me, and yeah.
Thank you for showing up, and thank you for participating. And we'll be in touch in one way or another.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Nikolai, do we have the chat? Like, can we save the chat?
I took a
I was just-
few photos, but I think it does get recorded.
Oh, okay.
Hey,
Okay.
Nikolai. Sorry,
We're
just to
running
get-
away. Don't worry.
Okay. Right. There's a host, an actual person.
Yeah, yeah. I can get the chat and send it on to you, Nikolai, but I'm gonna have to close this meeting because the next one's coming up, if that's okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.